Into Africa every year, like birds migrating south, a few hundred men take to the air and fly in the spirit of the first aviators, for the pleasure of living dangerously. Water skiing on a canal, one of the most illegal and dangerous forms of flying, introduced to the Sudan by New Zealander Max Lacey. A stately country house in the heart of Kenya, home to Tony Abercrombie Dick, an Englishman in the classic mould, reserved almost to the point of coldness, but with a passion for dangerous flying.
Okay, fine. Okay.
On the border of guerrilla territory, a Red Cross plane is being prepared to fly out wounded victims of the Civil War. The pilot is Paddy Mackay. These men share a love of low flying. They are agricultural pilots, ag pilots as they call themselves, and this, for them, is the last frontier of real physical flying. Tony Abercrombie Dick runs a one-man crop spraying outfit. His task here is to set up a base camp and clear a runway for his next assignment. He first came here in the 50s when Kenya was a country to be avoided, a violent place. It was the time of the Mau Mau and a bloodthirsty struggle to oust the British.
Came out to East Africa from Britain in 1955. I stayed on ever since. I think that Kenya had by then got hold of me, and I can't think of myself living anywhere else.
The military emergency ended in Kenya, and Abercrombie looked for a way to sweeten the tedium of peace. He learned to fly.
I started flying a long time ago, which makes me sound terribly old. I'm not old, I'm young. But after I'd been flying for a little while, I used to spray during the spraying season and fly charter during the charter season. After a while, I stayed spraying only, no charter at all. I still get a thrill out of spraying. There's a tremendous amount of spraying in Africa, and we all move all around Africa, and it's really an awful lot of fun.
Spraying crops with chemical to protect them is essential all over Africa, where harvests are too often devastated by natural disasters. Here in Kenya, coffee, a mainstay of the economy, is in every sense a high-risk business.
Dare not hit the top of the coffee trees. Coffee trees are 6 or 7 feet high off the ground, which you have to take into consideration when flying under wires. The thing you never do is to fly up a mountain or into a valley. Those are two things you never ever do. But at Milmet, you have to do both of those things. You're carrying a big heavy load on board, and flying up a mountain with a big load on board, spraying, your speed's falling off, your controllability's falling off, and at the end of it, you're going to have to do a very steep turn. So you're going to be very near the stall, and as you're meeting rising ground, obviously it's a lot more difficult. If you're meeting the ground falling away from you, or flat, it would be easier. That's the reason you never fly up a mountain. And into a valley, your turning circle is restricted by the walls of the valley. Particularly if the valley comes to a dead end, I mean, you're in an awful lot of trouble. So one never does that if you can possibly avoid it.
Back home in Langata, Abercrombie can indulge in his second love, riding. His 12 horses and his lifestyle are afforded not so much by his crop spraying, but by a lucrative charter business and a substantial private income. During the polo season, he plays for Kenya, and in the old days he was a famous hunt jockey.
A long time ago, I was riding in a steeplechase, and I had a bad fall, which knocked me out. And later on in the race, the horse is coming around for the second time. The horse fell over the same fence and fell on top of me. The jockey on the other horse had as bad an accident as I did, and we both landed up in hospital. I broke my back. I was paralyzed for some time over this, and I had to go to England for treatment.
There he was told he would never walk again. He was determined to prove the doctors wrong. Within a few months he was walking and longed to fly. But in aviation, after any major injury, the pilot's license is immediately revoked, and Abercrombie realized that no doctor, knowing of his injury, would pass him through the stringent medical examination. So undaunted, he enrolled at a flying school in Oxfordshire, pretending to be a novice. There, in no time, he re-qualified and passed the medical. He had, of course, omitted to tell them his history.
I flew within a year. Literally within 1 year, I was back to flying. And I was past 100% fit.
An ag pilot can sometimes play at being God. Cloud seeding, making rain from hail or storm clouds, is a dangerous game. The plane is sucked up by turbulence into the eye of a storm where rockets of silver iodide are fired. One small, single-engine plane seems too fragile to survive a storm that can stretch for miles. Crop spraying is not a fashionable business. The highly active chemicals poured on crops have the potential to destroy every living thing except the harvest. The pilots are only too aware of this.
Obviously, chemicals are bad in some form, whereas they do an awful lot of good in others. You've got to spray. Things like armyworm, you can't control by ground spraying. They cover miles and miles. You can't possibly cover that. Quelea birds, locusts, all these things, you can't possibly cover them by ground spray. They've got to be sprayed by air. The quelea birds they're absolutely dreadful. They're regarded something like locusts now with the amount of wheat and grain that they eat in a day, what they can eat in a day. So we do have to spray them, and we do kill other birds. We're terribly sorry about it, but there's nothing else we can do.
Chemicals are usually a deterrent to snakes, the only form of wildlife that terrifies Abercrombie Dick.
I took off one day. The other pilot was on the ground filling up with chemical, and I looked down and I saw a snake in the cockpit with me, and to me it looked enormous. So I called up the other pilot on the ground and told him that I had an enormous snake in the cockpit with me, and as he knew about snakes, what did he think I should do? So he asked me what sort of a snake it was, etc. But by this time I'd got hold of an idea of pulling the nose of the airplane up, which made the snake slide to the back of the airplane. I did this a few times, but of course every time I do that I gain altitude, so I'm getting further and further away from the ground. Anyway, he asked me how long it was, and looking at it in twisting and coiling, I thought between 6 and 7 feet long. And he said, how thick was it? And again, looking at it in the back of the airplane, I thought about as thick as a man's leg, you know. So he said, well, it could be one of two things, either a small python or a cobra. And I said, I thought it looked like a cobra, deadly snake. So I did get down to the ground, stopped the airplane and hopped out immediately. And we all stood watching, waiting for it to come up. It didn't come, till in the end, this other pilot opened the window to look in, put his hand in and picked this snake out by the middle of its body. Transpired it was a totally harmless little grass-cum-house snake. And he didn't kill it, but we measured it. It was 1 foot 1 inch long and about as thick as your little finger. But at the time, of course, one gets an awful shock when you see a snake like that, and I thought it was enormous.
If an ag pilot survives his first 2 years and is still intact, then he has mastered the skill of crop spraying. But the dangers are always there and must never be forgotten.
Accidents do happen. The margin of error is obviously reduced because we're flying close to the ground, so they're extra careful. And with the result, accidents are few and far between. But there are one or two. One I'm thinking of is of a man who had a horror of going under power lines. It's far easier to go under a power line than over it, because you can see the power line all the way, whereas if you go over it, as soon as the nose goes over the wire, you've lost sight of it. This pilot, however, would always go over them, and on this occasion we were flying together. I finished the job a lot earlier than he did, and all the farmers were teasing him one evening in the club, saying the reason I had finished before him was because I flew under the wires and he flew over them. Quite incorrect. However, I left the country, and in the morning he had a day's work to finish, and my crew was staying on to help him, my markers. He took off, and the first thing he did was fly under the wires, which shattered them. Turned, and then coming back the other way, flying straight into the sun, was endeavouring to fly under the wires again, but obviously thought better of it at the last moment. Pulled up and hit the wires with the wing. The whole thing went up in flames, and my crew couldn't get to him to open the door. Because the roof of the aircraft was on the ground, he couldn't open the doors, and the only alternative that he could see was to put his foot through the window, which he did. But as the inside of the cockpit was then full of fumes, the whole thing just blazed, and he was burnt to death in a matter of seconds. The pilot's wife and mother, they were awfully distraught at the time, and both of them did their very best to persuade me to give up flying immediately, particularly ag flying. And when I asked them, why on earth do you want me to stop flying, they said, because we both know that you're the next one to go. We both know that you're going to be killed very soon if you keep on flying and spraying. Difficult for me to stop in the middle of a season like that. So what I did was I said that at the end of the season I would consider what they'd said and think about it. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to stop, so I'm still flying. And I haven't been killed often since then either.
Not for lack of trying. In Africa, there is often a need for pilots to rescue people stranded in dangerous and sometimes illicit situations. Who could be better equipped for this work than an ag pilot, with his knowledge of the terrain, his ability to fly low, avoiding radar, and most of all, his thirst for danger? It would be foolish for any pilot to admit to one of these ventures.
I did hear a story about some pilots who were spray pilots who had been asked to do a rescue mission in another country. And they took an aircraft, flew there, just about on nightfall, landed on an old road, picked up the people, and unfortunately they didn't do a very good job in getting in there because the Air Force had been alerted. And the Air Force tried to shoot them down, although these people, being ag pilots, flew low coming out. And the Air Force, as it was getting dark, the Air Force couldn't find them, so they escaped quite safely. But that's one or two of the only stories I've heard of a mission which is dangerous and is not very clever to do.
Abercrombie has been asked to undertake another dangerous flight, this time by 2 Italian journalists desperate to get into southern Sudan, to Buma, the rebel headquarters of the SPLA. The recent death of a British journalist blown up by a road mine has closed all avenues across the border. To fly there is considered suicidal, not just by insurance companies. But Abercrombie has agreed to take them at only standard charter rates.
Can you have everything down at the airstrip waiting for me, over?
Maybe he's a crazy man, but of course he's one of the best pilots here in Kenya. He had worked a lot in this special operation with the journalists and with other kind of people, and he knows very well how flight over a war area and particularly over a rebel stronghold area.
Several planes have been shot down in that area. The SPLA guerrillas have SAM-7 heat-seeking missiles which home in on planes flying at high altitude, while flying low is an open invitation to less sophisticated weapons such as Kalashnikovs. It is a 5-hour flight to Bruma. In the end, the Italians were refused access. But for men like Abercrombie Dick, the pleasure of a dangerous journey is enough. As one high-risk flyer ends his journey and returns home, 2,000 miles to the north in the Sudan, a host of others are beginning theirs. These are the crop sprayers who descend on the land in late August to spray 2 million acres of cotton. A.m., the start of another long day. These men work from dawn to dusk, flying 10 hours a day with hardly a break, 7 days a week for 5 or 6 months. Their pay is less than £2,000 a month during the season, with no guarantee of continuous contracts. Max Lacey, based in Wadi Shahir, has been working 30 days without a break.
When you get to about the 26th day, then in the morning it's damn hard to get out of bed and you feel fatigued. I won't use the word tired because that doesn't even come into it, really. Part of being a good ag pilot is the ability to recognise fatigue and then peak yourself up. I don't know how it's done. It's something to do with your subconscious. And you peak above the fatigue to survive until you can get your break. You've got a climatical problem, high heat, dust, dirt, a different culture that is sometimes difficult to live with. You've got the routine of flying, the arduous aspect of flying, day by day, day by day, day by day. And the problems that arise, mechanical problems and sickness problems. People get malaria, people get food poisoning and diarrhea and dysentery and all sorts of things. Sometimes I wonder why we go and do it. But I suppose it comes back to this fact of flying.
Max Lacey started flying in New Zealand in 1960, but the work there for ag pilots dried up, and he's been coming to Africa for the last 15 years. This is his 10th consecutive season in the Sudan.
You touch your machine and I suppose you're back in tune with it. You kick it in the guts and away you go. You know it's serving you well. You've been listening to it for 8 or 9 hours a day before and you know that if there's any engine problems, you feel the pulse of the aeroplane. You have this relationship with a particular aeroplane that you're flying for a season. The fact that you're in tune with it. You know it's going to be all right that day. Good agricultural pilots have got to have a delicate balance between overconfidence and underconfidence. If he's overconfident, he'll have an accident. And if he's underconfident, he'll be unproductive. So he must strike this delicate balance between the two. Well, it is fun to fly 3 feet off the ground. It's a great sensation. It's a great experience. I suppose one of the attractions could be the challenge of it. The type of flying that we do is definitely what we call seat of the pants, and it's probably the only type of flying like that left. Bush pilots get something of it, but then they're not near the ground all the time like we are. So it is seat of the pants. You really got to look out the window, as we say, or get your head out of the office.
Flying at speeds of up to 160 miles an hour, with an average of almost 1,180-degree turns every day, any split-second lapse can mean disaster. There are trees, wires, buildings, canal banks to be avoided, and with 120 takeoffs and landings each day, there is always a risk of engine failure.
The dangers are very much there. There's no denying that. Any agricultural pilot that looked lightly on the potential dangers would be a fool. One of the big hazards with flying in Africa is striking people with the airplane and usually killing them. A lot of the crops, in particular cotton, has a canopy, and you'll get a field hand in the crop. He hears the airplane, but very late, and then stands up quickly to see where it is, and you hit him. And in some cases, the pilots hit them without even seeing them. They've actually stood up underneath the long nose of the aircraft. And of course, it's immediate death.
I had a slight accident. One of the local people got killed in it. He was sitting, a gentleman concerned was sitting behind some fairly high bushes and heard the aeroplane coming and stood up, and I hit him with one wheel. He was killed, unfortunately, but every year there seems to be somebody killed in the Gazira with much the same thing.
The chemicals are another danger.
I've been very careful with chemicals. I certainly try not to handle them on the ground. But we do get in positions where we do have a big intake, and that is when you get wind changes and you're flying through your own spray. Until they can find better chemicals, we have to live with the chemicals that we've got. If you take Africa and the isolation of Africa, the only way to protect the crops is with an aeroplane. It is the only way at the moment. Perhaps we'll find a better way soon. Temperature is a big problem in Africa. Dehydration. You're doing quite a physical thing in a cockpit which doesn't lend itself to good ventilation. And you have a big fluid loss. So you've got to carry a large amount of water with you and have an uptake of it continually throughout the day to stop dehydration, because that will lead to an effect on your eyesight, which is an absolute no-no as far as an ag pilot is concerned, and fatigue will set in from dehydration. So it's important to have a lot of water with you and have a big uptake of it all the time. It's a harsh way of living. It's a pretty harsh way of spending a day and trying to earn a buck. You're sweating a lot. It's very, very hot, particularly in Sudan. It's one of the hottest countries in the world. You're talking about 46 degrees centigrade. Got a lot of dust, so you've got a lot of grit on your body, and at the end of the day you really feel terrible. But somehow the fact that you have this sort of freedom when you're in the airplane and you are spending most of the time aloft, I suppose you sort of forget about it, really. Having said that we are individuals. We're individuals in the airplanes, but we certainly can't be individuals when we're in the rest house. You've got to be able to live in a bed next to another guy for 6 months, and the bed might be only 1 meter away. You've got to put up with all his idiosyncrasies, all his oddities, and still come out at the end of the day reasonably good friends.
Was it Angola you were working in, or Mozambique?
15 years.
As what? Not spray pilot.
No, I was spraying in Brazil. Angola is airlines.
You see, another airline guy who couldn't take it. Didn't like your captain.
Yeah? Fokker 27.
I beg your pardon?
Fokker...
Well, I thought you said.
No,
A stretch of 6 months with no women, no television, no luxuries, not even shops, can seem like eternity. And because the Sudan has now imposed Islamic law, they can't even relax with a beer at the end of the day.
This isolation from our families and our normal European environment, that is something that we all find very difficult to take, and we miss terribly. Pilots have periods of depression because of this. They miss their families or their children. Mail is always late. A small thing written in a letter by a wife can be interpreted during a period of depression into being something completely wrong. These are the sort of things that one experiences. The guys do get depressed sometimes. Sudan is terribly isolated, I suppose, because of its primitiveness. The communications are bad with the outside world, particularly where we're based. And if something really goes wrong, that worries you. If something goes wrong at home or something goes wrong with you, there's not a hell of a lot of hope for you. Hospitalization is poor. I suppose isolation is the word that would describe Sudan.
This job is definitely not good for married men. A single man's job. And the reason I say that is many of my friends have unfortunately been through divorces, and it's entirely due to being away from home for so long. And coming back slightly changed, I think, the relationship seems to get off from a different angle or whatever. But statistically, I read a UN report on this very subject, and over 90% divorces in crop spraying. It's the being away for so long. And out of communication, like how we can't phone, letters take 2 to 3 weeks to arrive, and some never get there, or we don't receive them.
To be cut off from females is very obvious in Sudan because it's very abrupt. You leave Khartoum at the start of the season and you fly out into the bush and that's it. I think it's a matter of turning a tap off, really. The old hands literally do that. They just turn a tap off. They find their outlet in whatever pursuit they have.
There's one of those vultures.
A day off with not much to do. Some of the men wander off to the hills, and if they're lucky, they'll find something to play with.
Pretty small, those ones,
Look at this big fella coming up now. Look at this.
There's a big pool up there actually covered with duckweed sort of stuff, and they feed it while they drink out of that. The duckweed sort of stuff stops it evaporating.
I saw them this morning.
Baboons are not famous for their friendliness, but these men are desperate.
It's not one of ours. Where? Where is it? Where is it?
Back at base, a break in the routine. The approach of an unfamiliar plane. Peter Brook is a spray pilot based in New Halfa, a few hundred miles away. He has flown here to find an engineer. Brook is 63 years old. He has retired every year for the last 10 years, but every season finds him returning to spray in the Sudan.
Hello, Peter. Even longer.
An RAF pilot in the Second World War, he flew with Group 38 on undercover missions. Since then, he has fought and survived cancer, but he now has only one lung. Ag flying is as dangerous and isolated as the art of soldiering. And like members of a forgotten regiment, these ag pilots too have their heroes and their heroes' stories.
I had 2 seconds before I hit the ground. Just 2 seconds. I didn't have time to
amazing
dump.
how they
I didn't even have time to swear.
It's amazing how they always end up upside down.
Oh, it hit a bank, actually. There's a bank just here.
Always.
And it came and hit the bank and just went straight over.
But how did you make out of it?
I got a very nasty bang on the head. I was unconscious about half an hour. And
You're lucky it didn't burn.
Sort of dragged me
Very
out.
lucky
Yeah,
it didn't
very
burn.
lucky, wasn't I?
Yeah.
So I
Too
took
old,
me
he's too
to
old.
the hospital at near half hour. And that was a terrible experience there. It was 5.5 hours before anybody came to see me. And then they came and stitched me up with no anaesthetic and very brutal.
Mind you, where there's no senses, no feeling.
As John said, he looked at the stitching in my head, he said, you know, I've seen Nietzsche stitching on a coal sack from that. And when it came to sort of, all my arms were all cut and fleshy, they cut the flesh off with a pair of scissors.
Where is this place?
Just do half the hospital. So at that, you know, I said, well, look, I think you've done all you can for me. And I discharged myself and sort of went home and so I went to bed for 2 days, and so that wasn't too bad. Do you want to show me around now?
Yes, you can do that.
See you in a minute, Alan.
Okay. Have fun then.
I heard you were living in converted packing cases.
Yeah, kind of. But with doors and windows on it. And there in the corner there we have this...
Got the roll of honour there, I see.
Yeah, the different seasons.
And a homemade air conditioner.
Yeah, it's not a homemade air conditioner, but we put the tube up to give it an even temperature in both of them, because they were having blankets here and sweating in the other one. So
That's a jolly good idea. How are you doing, gentlemen?
I suppose we're all a little bit crazy, really, because we go to these awful places in the world and work under these harsh conditions. We would never do it if we were to drive a tractor or to drive a lorry or to do any other type of job. But we're flying airplanes, and that's the magic of it.
At the start of the season, planes are ferried in convoy from Europe to Africa across thousands of miles. Only the lead plane has navigational aids, so the others have to rely on keeping sight of the plane ahead. The dangers of getting lost are forbidding.
At that time of the year, in late August, early September, you must leave Luxor early to arrive just after midday Khartoum, before the thunderstorms develop. But for some reason, they left late. I think it was as late as 3 in the afternoon. And north of Khartoum, they ran into a Habu, a dust storm. They got separated. The second pilot was relatively inexperienced, and he became disorientated in the dust and crashed. He wrote something on the dashboard of the aircraft before he died. It took 5 days for the search party to find the aircraft, mainly because it was so far off the intended track.
Every pilot's nightmare is that one day he might lose his nerve. So fear is an emotion not usually discussed.
Yes, well, you're just frightened, but you want to survive, you know. And it manifests itself in different ways. To me, my legs start shaking. I just, you know, I start shaking. But you just got to keep working and to survive. You know? You can't give up. I would say that we're a breed. Definitely, we're a breed. I have known pilots that have taken up ag flying And they've been reasonably good, but they couldn't hack it. It wasn't their scene. They had to follow another calling. Still in flying, but they had to follow another route.
You sort of compare this sort of flying with airline flying, it's like comparing a bus with a Ferrari, really. Well, that's the way I feel anyway, I think. Most of the ag pilots feel that way.
Yeah, this being the man and his machine or something like that, it's a very used word for it, but it's, in a way, when flying, the pilot and the aircraft tends to like melt together, to be a creature of its own and try to get everything out what the aircraft is possible to do and to get everything out what you are possible to do.
We're very much pilot and command of a single-seat airplane. Fun, we go and do it. Some of us get caught. But we can go and have a little bit of fun now and again and still enjoy the old basics of flying. When you've finished spraying for the day, you usually top up with water and by pre-arrangement do a run towards each other, very close, and a sharp pull up and dump the water out, which is quite spectacular. I suppose we're all a little bit of biggles at the back of our mind, you know.
Paddy Mackay, an Irishman from Rathlin Island, is another crop spraying pilot who, until 2 years ago, worked in the Sudan.
In the Sudan, we had a fatal accident just about every year. Well, in fact, every year I was there, we had a fatal.
He now flies in and out of war zones in Ethiopia and the Sudan for the International Committee of the Red Cross. The job affords Paddy much of the same excitement as ag flying, but he is sometimes nostalgic for the fun they used to have in the Sudan.
To amuse ourselves in the evening, if we were well down, say on the Blue Nile, a quiet stretch of the Nile, we had a business of touching the wheels down on the water, and we called it water skiing. And we developed this over the years in the Sudan, so it became a sort of crop sprayer's sport in Sudan. But we took it a bit too far because just outside the big town of Wad Medani, there was a new big Chinese bridge built there with wide spans, and we took to flying under that. First of all, just flying, and then we took to water skiing under the bridge, so that really got the authorities going. But they asked us to stop very politely, you know, so they'd have locked us up elsewhere.
Water skiing on an irrigation canal, the wheels of the plane just skimming the water at speeds of 120 miles per hour, looks deceptively simple, but the risks are high. Floating debris or the slightest obstacle hidden in the water can write off a machine worth £250,000. A fate worse than death for any ag pilot. But it's fun, and so they do it. Paddy is currently based in Lokichokio, northern Kenya, a Red Cross outpost manned by a group of dedicated doctors and nurses of mixed nationality.
He's looking better, eh?
Yeah, he's growing. It's growing well. He's been sick last week. Now
He wants to share.
Now he's much better.
Paddy used to run his own veterinary pharmaceutical company in Suffolk.
He must be just over a month, probably 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks.
But in 1974, bored with the routine, he threw it all in and took up his hobby, flying.
My first few weeks crop spraying in England was pretty exciting, to say the least. I've sort of tended to run into things with the utmost regularity. The kind of things you run into in a crop spraying, the kind of things that are there, you know, like trees and fences and the ground occasionally. Sort of, you see the startled look on the markers in the field, you know, when the pilot gets it wrong. It is going straight for them with say, half a ton of wheat around the legs and a very frightened look on the face of the pilot. After a month or two, I got the hang of it, you know, and I carried on. I enjoyed it.
The current embargo on any planes flying over the southern Sudan has temporarily forced the Red Cross to operate from the Kenyan border. Wounded victims of the Civil War are brought here by land and then flown to the nearest hospital for treatment. The Red Cross brief is to ensure that any victim of conflict, civilian or soldier, should receive assistance.
You have to bring to Lodward Camillo Pasquale. He has a big abscess around the thigh. That was a shell.
These wounded patients, probably guerrilla fighters, will receive the same attention as civilians or military soldiers.
How many do we have anyway? Huh? How many passengers?
Three patients. Good, there is a tall one. He had a gunshot wound through this right ankle.
A lot of injured people. The passengers, some of them have never, perhaps hardly seen a plane except from a very long distance. Very often they look petrified, you know, with eyes like saucers. And in my company we do hundreds of off-airstrip landings every year. Actually, off-airfield landings perhaps the most exciting because you've never ever been there before. And so all you can do is fly over and sort of eyeball it to have a good look and see if there are any big stones or anything lying on where you might want to land. Also, maybe you just run the wheels over it and then take off again and then come around and look and see how deep the tyre marks are. It is exciting. If you're landing on areas that are not within your brief, and then there's obviously a possibility of, say it's a road, it may well be mined, of course, and the result of hitting a mine is fairly catastrophic. I have seen the effect of a mine on an aircraft. It burst a tyre on a de Havilland Twin Otter when it landed on a mine. I think it was a combination of the explosion and the pressure in the tyre, but fragments of rubber went through the wing. It was a bit of a tragic case as well, because while they were staring at the wheel, someone trod another mine just a few yards away, and he was seen sort of somersaulting in the air. And in fact, when the security people came along and found a third one, it was sort of diagonally across the airstrip. How was your first day as a surgeon anyway?
This guy who was shot through his mouth, and he has some loose teeth, and he came to show it hurt, so I took some instrument and picked them. No, I said, if it hurts, you tell me. And I stopped, he just kept like doing like this.
The tower came back and said, I think you hit the ambulance.
Yeah.
So that's when my knee started shaking for the first time.
And we arrived at the strip. There was a long line of guys walking along the strip with little white sticks like blind men have, and poking at the ground. And Michelle said to me, what the hell do you think you're doing? I said, I don't know. So we just flew over them and landed. And what they were doing was checking the strip for mines.
So you did the job. So I think they packed up their sticks and went home again, huh?
Mined airstrips were only one of the hazards in Ethiopia, where Paddy was based for 2 years. Ace pilots were recruited for this highly complex operation, involving 12 planes continuously flying food supplies in, and when necessary, flying victims out of both military and guerrilla strongholds. Runways were short, rock-strewn surfaces in altitudes of up to 11,000 feet. An aviational nightmare.
My first introduction really in Ethiopia was to a strip we know as Mike Yankee, and it was in a very deep basin formed by steeply rising ground on 3 sides and fairly steeply rising ground on a 4th. And it meant to get in you had to take on sort of characteristics of a brick to get down in there in this deep hole. And when you got there, it was on quite a steep hill, extremely narrow, extremely short, and it had a transverse slope It had trees at the end, and there was a steep bank just beside the wingtip. And I don't know how many 1,000 tons we flew in there into this place. And it's amazing. I think the only reason we never did have a mishap on that strip, it was so incredibly frightening. Everyone was working overtime flying into it. It was a very, very exciting place.
Paddy has just been told that the Red Cross is sending him back to Ethiopia. But one day he hopes to return to crop spraying.
I really do miss crop spraying at times. I mean, the low flying is a very exhilarating business, and this is a license to do it as much as you like.
There's a time when this hunger for low flying can seem a passion as hopeless and pathological as unrequited love. A 1,000 miles to the south, Abercrombie Dick is preparing for his next assignment, spraying tsetse fly, which requires flying at dawn and dusk with no lights.
Peter.
Yeah.
Peter.
Yep.
Now tomorrow we're going to spray this area.
Yeah.
There to there.
Yeah.
There to there.
Yeah.
Very early, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Go and put the markers there,
Yeah.
there, there and there. And I want you to park the lorry there.
Yeah.
And I want to start flying at 5:30.
5:30.
You understand?
For Abercrombie, the craving for this kind of flying is unstoppable. It can't be argued with rationally, and those who have this craving put it first, above friends, family, health, everything. All that matters is the flying.
I overdid the spraying, and we ought to wear masks. All of us spray pilots should wear masks, but very, very few of them never do. I think I did too much, and I got chemical poisoning. I went into hospital, and they told me that if I didn't stop spraying, I'd be dead within a year. That was over a year ago, and I'm still spraying. I feel that spraying is a way of life to me now, and I just can't imagine myself not A, flying, and B, spraying during the spraying season. And I'm still doing it. I don't think I could live without continuing spraying now.